All right, good afternoon, Maria and Michelle. We're going to go ahead and go through cycle 2, step 1 together. I'm going to just go through the simple directions of cycle 1. I'm also going to go through the templates that are now uploaded on Google Drive as well as the rubrics, hopefully to make this video brief and to the point. And if you have any questions throughout the week after this video, feel free to just email me and say, hey, I just want a clarification here. Or you can even just give me a call on my cell phone. You both should have my cell phone number. It's in the link to my, or it's in the signature in my email. Okay, so as you can see, this is step 1 of cycle 2. I'm going to just really quickly go through what it is that you need to do and the evidence that you need to submit instead of getting really specific in the directions. And I may peruse the directions here in a minute just to point out a couple things, but really I think this sums it up pretty well. So what you will need to do is you will provide contextual information about the whole class you are teaching within a school placement. So I'm actually going to go over here. Actually, nope, that's not what I want. Sorry. I'm going to go here, and on Google Drive, you will find that. So you've done this before in cycle 1. So this is the contextual information template. And it's really like cycle 1, step 1 was, where you kind of just describe your students and your class and give some demographical information. Down here when it says topic of content specific instruction and assessment sequence, this is just a quick summary of what your unit is going to be about. So for example, Maria, if you're doing a unit on linear equations, right? Hey, we're going to be doing linear equations and I'm going to be, at the end of this unit doing this big assessment. And in between, I'll be assessing them in this way. Same thing in science. We are going to be learning about this topic, describe what the topic is, and then essentially talk about how you're going to assess the learning goals. So this was really just a summary of what your unit should be. Okay, so once you provide contextual information on that document, you are going to develop a plan for a series of 3 to 5 lessons, and you're going to complete the learning segment template that includes these 8 things. You'll have the California content standards. You have learning goals for ELD, which is English language development as appropriate. You'll have evidence and description of assessments of learning. So you'll have an informal, at least one informal assessment, one student self-assessment, and one formal assessment that you're going to show within these 3 to 5 lessons. Again, learning goals. Well, let me just go back here. So content standards you'll have, and then you'll have ELD standards for these. Sorry, I'm going to backtrack again. California standards. You'll have learning goals that tie to those California standards. And you may need ELD standards also to support learning goals depending on if you have English language learners. Okay, so number 4 within this lesson segment is you also need to describe how each lesson links to the prior learning and or builds on previous lessons. So there just needs to be, as they put in the directions, a clear start and an end. And so making sure that each of your lessons show that, like, in the beginning, I'm going to go here, throughout the unit, I'm going to go here, and then towards the end of my lesson segment, I'm trying to get them to be here. Number 5, you'll describe the learning activities, including how you and your students will use educational technology and how you will ensure equitable access to content. You'll describe the instructional strategies, English language development and academic language development, and instructional adaptations and accommodations. So if we go back over here, I keep going to my rubric, excuse me. This is what you'll find. And they give you a nice little cheat sheet on what those things are. How does it fit? Learning activities, instructional strategies. So this learning segment first part is really you can build off your summary. So here's my topic for my unit. Here are all the standards that I'm going to cover in my unit. Here are the English language development standards for students that are English language learners in my class. And then my ultimate unit goal, which should be this learning goal, this unit goal, should be the big overarching purpose of the unit. So for example, in math, it may be this big standard and this big goal that you're trying to help them accomplish. Same thing in science. And then the lessons will be kind of micro goals or mini goals that build up to the ultimate goal of the learning, which I always used to describe, or I still describe this to my students, is this is kind of ultimately in the end of the unit, you want students to be able to accomplish what? So this will be the big goal. And then the lessons will be the small goals or the sub goals that lead up to the big goal. So as you can see in lesson 1, you'll provide a learning goal that connects to this. You're going to give me the evidence of the assessment, and you don't have to have an informal, a self, and a formal all in here. You literally could just write, I'm going to do an informal assessment to meet this goal today. How does this lesson link to prior learning? This might be the first lesson. You can talk about how it links to prior learning in previous classes. Learning activities, again, what are students going to be able to do in order to meet this goal? And if you're going to use educational technology, how will the students use educational technology? Describe all the strategies that you will do, not necessarily the activities that they're going to do to learn the goal, but what activity or what strategies are you going to use to help them meet the goal? And then you provide any English language development strategies and support, as well as accommodations and adaptations for students that have specific learning needs. And then at the end of the lesson, they want you to write, based on what you learned as a result of teaching this lesson, what changes, if any, would you make to the next lesson? And you kind of just do a quick reflection there and then jump into lesson 2 and showing in this lesson 2 sequence what the next segment would be or the next sequence would be in your lesson to help them get to the ultimate goal. So I hope that makes sense. I'll just go over it again kind of to synthesize that together. Big goal, sub goal in the plan, and then the very next lesson is what's the next sequence in lesson 2 that will help you get closer to the ultimate goal. So there's a little wiggle room here. And so this goes all the way down. Again, you can have up to 5 lessons. But ultimately what they want to see is that lesson 1, lesson 2, lesson 3 build upon each other to get you from point A, the start, to point B, which is the end. And that at the end of this last lesson, we'll have the formal assessment in there, or at least a lesson that'll get you closer or as close to the formal assessment as possible. So if you have questions about that, feel free to shoot me an email and let me know. Okay, the next thing you're going to have in step 1 is you also need to describe your assessment. So you're going to describe one of your planned informal, student self, and formal assessment, and explain how they're aligned to measure the content specific and, if appropriate, ELD learning goals. So the written narrative, and again, you can see that I'm giving you, these are the evidence that you need to submit. The written narrative is also in our Google Drive, and here it is. And essentially what they want you to do is just describe the assessment, describe the criteria, describe the assessment, describe the criteria. Again, describe the assessment, describe the criteria, meaning, so for example, I'm going to use an informal assessment to plan that I'm planning to implement and the corresponding rubric. So the rubric is essentially the criteria. So if you're going to observe student learning, and actually this is a really, let me go to here for descriptions because I think I really like how the TPA describes it. Okay, so like an informal assessment, I'm going to have you read this box. So informal assessment should be developmentally appropriate. If the informal assessment involves questioning, list the questions you plan to ask. If the informal assessment is a running record, describe how you plan to document students' reading ability. If your students are working collaboratively in groups, provide the set of instructions, expectations for learning. If students engage in peer assessment, provide guiding questions. So you're going to provide all those as part of your evidence of the assessment, but you also need to provide what it is that you're going to be looking for in those informal assessments. So to now go back, if you were questioning students, you might have the list of questions, but you also are going to provide what you want to see in the answers to those questions in order to know that students are being successful and meeting the learning goal. So I hope that makes sense. So let's go ahead and go back up to the directions again up here. Oh, sorry. Okay. So again, you're providing that context, you make your plan, you describe an informal assessment, a student self-assessment, and a formal assessment, at least one. If you have more than one, that's fine, but keep in mind, this document can be no more than 7 pages. And then for each assessment that you describe, you want to provide a blank copy of the informal assessment and the rubric that you're going to use, a blank copy of the student self-assessment and rubric, and a blank copy of the formal assessment and rubric. And like I said yesterday, to make my life easier, would make this rubric and this rubric exactly the same. So essentially, let me go back down here because your formal assessment, and they do a good job at describing it right here. The formal assessment must be a product, a process, or performance. So a product, it needs to be a visual representation, a written product, or a 3D model. A process can be a mathematical problem with an explanation of how they solve the problem. So this might help you, Maria. Or a performance, a demonstration, a presentation. But you have to have some kind of a rubric that says, like for example, with a mathematical problem, they they did this, they did that, and that's how I will know if they've met the goal. So especially with a process rubric, and we can maybe get more into this. Well, you do need to describe this. A process rubric is a little bit different than product and performance, because as a product, I'm looking for specific things in the product. I'm looking to see if they have certain criteria, like do they have, an understanding of this, and do they have, correct grammar or correct spelling or any of those kinds of things. Same thing with the performance. They were doing a presentation. Did they speak clearly? Did they include the information that I wanted them to include? In the process, you might be really looking more for, did they follow the certain steps? So in a mathematical problem with slope, did they follow this algorithm? Did they explain in detail how they arrived at the answer that they arrived? So you're doing a little bit more, not looking for certain things in the product and performance. I'm hoping this makes sense, because I'm trying to make this not sound as confusing. This is more like, here is a product and here is a performance that I'm going to be looking at certain things. But the process is you're looking more procedural instead of at quality. And so I hope that kind of makes sense. And I gave enough example there that makes sense. I don't want to be too repetitive. Okay, so in a nutshell, that is step one. So I would make sure you're doing all these things. The things that you're going to submit are the narrative, the learning segment, the written narrative of your assessment, and then copies of all your assessments with rubrics. And then just to close this short video, there are 2 rubrics that they are going to use to assess those documents. And that's rubric 1 and rubric 2. So again, what are they looking for in everything that you just submitted? They're looking to see that your learning segment includes manageable content specific and, if appropriate, ELD learning goals that clearly build on students' prior content knowledge. They also are looking to see that you model and or scaffold strategies, those strategies are clearly described. So they'll see that in the learning segment. They'll see that your lessons are building on each other, and they'll see that you're using strategies to help them meet the learning goals. So that's what they're looking for there. They also want to see that you're identifying multiple kinds of evidence that you will look for to determine that the students are meeting both unit goals and individual lesson goals. And so you want to make sure that you're identifying all those. You also want to make sure that your learning segment includes activities, and I'm going to change these, not necessarily that support. I'm going to use the word, I think I've done this with you too before. They're not supporting, but you're using activities and strategies that scaffold the learning. Engagement means student-centered, and that really is clear on the unit plan, because the unit plan says, what will students do? That increases engagement when students are more involved. And then the big thing is that it's challenging, that it is at a level of rigor that you'll see here in a second, that allows students to transfer their knowledge or analyze or evaluate and any of those kinds of things. And then don't forget that grouping strategies need to be important, which that is interesting that they put that in there. You have to be, I'm going to make sure I'm clear on where you would describe the grouping strategy. I would put really in your instructional strategies, be really, really clear that you want to, and they put it right here, be really clear that on how you're grouping and why you're grouping and explaining all of that. And then obviously that the people who will grade your assessment are looking for content specific instructional strategies. So there's certain things that you'll do in math that you wouldn't do in science, and vice versa, things you'll do in science that you wouldn't do in math. And so they're going to be looking for those that include adaptations, accommodations for special learners, but that are definitely content specific. And then the second rubric, they're looking for 2 other things. They're looking for your assessments and your rubrics. They're looking for the instructional strategies of learning activities, and that they're all aligned to the learning goals. So once again, your assessment, your rubric, your instructional strategies, learning activities all support students achieving the unit goal as well as the individual lesson goal. And then finally, the lesson plan will build on one another to develop higher order thinking. So again, you might need to start with, basic understanding and knowledge, but they really want to see throughout your lessons that you're building on that to create higher level thinking, that you're also developing academic language throughout the lessons and the unit, and that the concepts and skills are likely to support students to engage with learning segment content. So they really just want to see from lesson to lesson that you're building understanding, and that understanding will eventually lead to the ultimate end unit goal, which will be assessed by your formal or summative assessment. So I know that was a really quick drive-by, and when I do these videos, I just like to just share what the information is. But the nice thing is that you have my support after you watch this video. If there's things that just don't seem clear, go ahead and shoot me an email or just give me a call on the phone as you're going through this process. But again, I highly, highly encourage, now that we're getting to the end of this kind of mini semester that we have together, that you take and set aside 30 minutes, maybe even an hour each and every day to continue to work on TPA and making progress there. So I hope this video was supporting, or was provides you the support. Sorry, it's been a long day. Provides you the support that you need. And if you have any questions, just let me know, and I will talk to you next week.